Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about making sure that your slide decks are accessible as part of this series of accessibility office hours that our team has been doing. So some of you may have joined some prior sessions. Our most recent one, we talked about user experience design, and we'll be next up talking about assistive technology. Catherine, you want to share a little about our team?
Sure. We're the Accessibility and User Experience team. We're part of Disability and Access Services in the Division of Student Life. We serve students, faculty, and staff at MIT. And we offer a large range of services. We do user experience consulting, and that is Chris LaRoche and myself. We also do accessibility consulting, and that is Rich Collegero and myself. Kate Quinn, Jen D, and Kathy Cahill all work on accessible course materials for students. And Kate, Jen, and Kathy also all work on assistive technology for students and staff. So we offer a broad range of services. And now I'm going to just turn it back over to Jen. If you ever want to get in touch with us, we're at accessibility@mit.edu. And just a couple notes about the session. We're recording the session. We will post it on our website once we have it captioned. We were hoping to have live captions today, but unfortunately we had a little technical glitch. So we will not be having live captions, but we will put up a captioned video of the session next week.
Thanks. So yeah, as we mentioned, this is a monthly event where we're trying to share information about accessibility and user experience issues and concepts that might be relevant to all of your work throughout the Institute. And please let us know what future topics would be interesting to you. So today we're going to be talking about accessible slide decks with somewhat of a focus on PowerPoint, but we're going to try and make it applicable to Google Slides or whatever your preferred way of presenting slides is as well. So we're going to be talking about templates and themes, text, layouts, slide masters, color contrast, visual indicators, use of color and symbols, unique slide titles, use of images, alternative text, transitions and fades, and automating captions and recording, and an accessibility checker tool. So I'm throwing a lot out there at you, but that's kind of our roadmap for the day of the different aspects we're going to cover. Some of those terms might be familiar to you, some of them might sound kind of new. But we're going to explore through the lens of keeping accessibility in mind. So starting off with our templates and themes. So when you are creating a new slide deck, you'll probably see the option to pick a template or a theme. So that's kind of referring to the color options, the text that they're giving you, the layouts. So when you're selecting or creating a template, because you can edit those and create your own, you want to be testing for accessibility. And once you have one that you like and you know is accessible, I do recommend using that same one pretty consistently throughout your work so you don't have to go through the process again. So you'll be looking for sufficient color contrast. So making sure that your text and your background color are different enough that visually impaired users will be able to see that as to a reasonable extent, that your text size is large enough. And you also want to look for the link colors. So you might think, okay, the text and the background have good contrast, but then once you're actually using links in there, oh, there's a new color to think about. And you want to check that the layouts that they have in that template will work for you, and that there aren't any kind of hidden transitions that you don't notice until you're presenting. Sometimes the templates will have a transition built in, and it's easier to just kind of avoid those, or if they are there, make sure that they're not too busy. So with our text, when you are thinking about the text that you're including, you want to be thinking about the text size. So is your font large enough? Is the font readable? Some of the kind of fancy looking script fonts are not super easy to read when you're sitting following along with somebody else's slides, especially, from the back of an auditorium or things like that. So we want to make sure that we're picking a font that's pretty easy to read. Especially, we've all had that experience of feeling like somebody's moving too quickly through their slides. If there's a not very readable font, that can definitely exacerbate that feeling of not being able to read before they move on. And for a similar reason, we want to try and avoid having too much text on a slide. And if you're going to caption, you're going to try and leave room for captions at the bottom of your slide. So you want to make sure you have some kind of negative space at the bottom so that when the captions show up, they're not blocking your content. One really great bang for your buck tip is to use the built-in layouts that come within your PowerPoint or Google Slides. So I've included an image here of what my version of PowerPoint looks like when I'm editing the layout, or choosing a layout rather. So I'm looking at the pre-existing options and choosing which one is going to work best for the content I'm trying to create in that slide. The reason that I think it's really useful to use these pre-existing layouts is so that screen readers will read the content in the correct order. So sometimes you do want to have your text boxes in maybe a less conventional setup. So it gets tempting to just add your own text boxes when you're making a new slide. Or maybe that's just the way that you're used to doing it. But that creates more possibility for the screen reader to get confused. So, and read the content in the wrong order. And when we're talking about screen readers, just to be clear, so that's an assistive technology that primarily blind users or visually impaired users will use to listen to the content on the screen being read out loud by their computer. So we want to make sure that they're getting that content in an order that makes sense. If you really can't find a pre-existing layout that works for your needs, you can edit the slide master. So I'm including an image here of, again, what that looked like on my version of PowerPoint. So I went to view and then slide master, and it shows you those different pre-existing layouts and allows you to edit them in there or create a new option in there. Then it becomes part of the layout options. I'm going to pause there for questions. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself or to enter it in the chat.
Can I ask a question? Is it fair to assume that if the screen reader reads top, left to right and down, is that?
Do you mean like if you're adding your own text boxes? No.
No.
That would be great. But not always. In my experience, it will typically read them in the order that you added them. But you want to kind of check that. And like I said, for me, it's just the most bang for my buck is to use the pre-existing layouts because then I have more confidence.
Well, okay, so even in the existing layouts, does it read top, fair to assume top corner, top left corner?
Yeah, in the
Right and down.
existing, yeah. Are there recommended font type and font size? Good question. The Generally considered easy to read fonts are kind of the Arial, Calibri, those kind of simple and clear ones. And for font size, for a PowerPoint, you really want to avoid going any lower than 18. Things more in like the 24 range are pretty good, but it does vary depending on the font type that you're using. You might have noticed sometimes if you're typing in one font and then you change the font style, it actually sometimes will look smaller, even though it's the same size, because different font types will look bigger or smaller. How do we find the right template and how can we tell if it's accessible? Great. So we have a link later on to a resource that should tell a little bit about that. But basically, by keeping in mind the different components of what we're talking about today, so looking for things like that text size, the color contrast, you can do kind of a check on that for yourselves. But yeah, there'll be a link we can reference later. Let's see. Yep, and we have a shout out to a free screen reader that if you get really excited about accessibility testing and want to do some of that yourself, people can download a screen reader and listen along as they're testing their content. All right, I think we're good on questions for now. So I've made a few allusions to color contrast, and we are going to dig a little more into that. So like I mentioned, we're looking here for sufficient contrast between text background or text and background colors. So there's a free download tool called Color Contrast Analyzer. And again, for me, I find it easier once I've figured out a color scheme with sufficient contrast, I'm sticking with it as much as I can. I like to use that consistency to my advantage so I don't have to check again. And I included a couple examples. So on the right, I have a logo from an organization called Girls Night In. I included that one because first of all, it's an organization I like. And second of all, I find a lot of stuff that's marketed to women typically sends off my color contrast radar. Did you guys check this? So we can check for ourselves and think about that. And then on the left, I included a screen grab of the voting website for Massachusetts, where I've spent a lot of time lately checking different things. And so I'm gonna ask Catherine to take the reins for a moment. I'll stop sharing, and she's going to do a little demo of using that color contrast analyzer.
Okay, I'm just going to share my desktop, and you should be able to see the PowerPoint, and so there's this slide with the voting site and Girls Night In and the color contrast analyzer. Can you just give me a verbal, is that on my screen? Is that what I'm sharing?
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So this is the color contrast analyzer interface. It's a small application that you download, and they have downloads for Mac and Windows. And you can test the foreground color and the background color. And it has this nice eyedropper here that you click on, you drag it over, and it allows you to pick up the color. So I'm curious about this white on light blue down here. So I'm gonna pick up that pixel for my foreground color. And then I'm gonna pick up this background color here, this darker blue. And down here, it tells me the results. And it tells me that it fails the contrast for WCAG 2.1 AA, which is the standard that we follow. And it fails for regular text and large text. And it tells me here what the contrast ratio is. And I believe that the contrast ratio should be 5:1 and 3.5:1 for large text. So I can try to darken the color, I can find out what a matching color would be. But I find this to be a really nice, simple tool to use. If you already know the hex colors, you can enter them here in these boxes instead of doing the drag and drop. Sometimes you'll have a color palette that you're using, and so you can just put those colors in there to test it. For Girls Night In, you can check the white on the green. And it will say, I was just below for large text. It's 2.987, so it's very close. For regular text, I'm sure that it fails, but this seems to be large text and a logo, so we could maybe just bump up that green a little bit and it would pass and meet the standard. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Jen.
All right, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so we kind of get our confirmation there. I think for me, just looking at it, I see that light blue and white and I think, yeah, no way. And as we can tell, that one's pretty far off. And then when we see the white and the green, that one was where we felt a little more questionable, probably. I was like, I don't know, I'd like to check. So we kind of get our confirmation there. Let's see. And I'm going to pause because we got an interesting question in the chat that I'd like to talk about. So the question is, how do you deal with using a template that a designer has set up for your department that doesn't pass accessibility standards? Is it insulting to them to change it? So that's a great question. I think being direct with them about, we have these concerns about accessibility is the best way to go. You're paying these people and you want to make sure that you get something that you can really rely on heavily and use for a long time. And Chris and Catherine, as folks who maybe have dealt with that part of the experience more, do you have any other tips?
I would just say that usually the color doesn't have to be changed too drastically. We find a lot of situations similar to the Girls Night In logo where I think it's close. And you really just have to explain to the designers that we don't want to exclude people and we don't want to leave people out. We want this to work. And is there a way that we can try to adjust the color scheme to meet the standard? It's a lot easier to do this earlier in the process. I think the question really points out that when you already have an established color scheme, it is a little harder to change it. It's easier to do it when you're in the design phase and you're thinking about the palette that you're going to use for your site or your materials. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. And another good question coming in, with a logo, what is the role of alt text versus ensuring that color contrast is sufficient? That's a great question. And the answer is you want to use both because for slightly different people, that's going to be challenging in different ways. And I guess what I mean is ensuring that color contrast is sufficient is going to help your low vision users or users with color blindness who primarily want to be able to have that visual experience and navigate by zooming in when they need, but are primarily relying on taking in information visually. And for alt text, that's going to be helpful to folks who want to be using the screen reader, either because that works better for their vision or just because that's a preference. So for a logo, we do want to include alt text that would say Girls Night In logo or Girls Night In. And we want to make sure that there's sufficient color contrast.
Jen, I would also add that the WCAG 2.1 standard says that logos should meet the contrast minimums.
Mm.
That used to not be included in the older standard, but they updated it to say that logos should be included.
Mhm. Great. So then we're kind of transitioning into the role of visual indicators. And by that, what we mean is how you're conveying information. We want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is not relying on something that's going to not show up on a screen reader. So if we are sorting information and only using like a change in color or a change in font style or bolding the text as a way to sort that information, that is not going to show up on a screen reader. And I'm actually going to go to the next slide and then come back to this one because I think this one is a little more clear about what I'm trying to say there. So if we are giving you a list of vendors for live captioning, and we give you this version that says those that also do transcriptions are in blue. And we have a list where there's 4 companies, and company 1 and company 4 are showing up in blue, and company 2 and company 3 are in black text. That is not going to register as a difference when using a screen reader. So another way that some folks will indicate those differences is they'll say vendors for live captioning are listed here, and those that also do transcriptions have asterisks. And so here we have that same list of company 1, company 2, company 3, and company 4, but now that information is indicated by an asterisk. If you want to do both, if you want to do color and asterisk, that works as well. But we just want to make sure there's some indicator that would register when using a screen reader. And so going back to this example, we have a image from Pixar Pals Parking. So it's a parking level guide, I believe from Disney. And they like to give you this information about your levels in a bunch of different ways. So they give you a level number, they give you a level theme. So level 1 is themed The Incredibles. And it also has a color associated with it. So we have level 1, The Incredibles, the color black. So there's a lot of different ways that we can remember or take in that information. Then this is another one that I think is a really great bang for your buck, simple change to make, but that a lot of people don't know about is this tip to use unique slide titles. And that is helpful because it helps both screen reader users and sighted users to find the correct slide quickly. So if I'm listening to the slides on a screen reader and I'm going through hitting like next on each slide title, looking for a topic, I don't want to have to then listen to the full text for 3 different slides because they all have the same title in order to find the right thing. So what if I have more to say on one topic? What if I can't fit all of my content about a certain theme on one slide? We recommend trying to get more specific about what you're trying to say on that slide. So look for little ways you can differentiate. Or if you need to, you can number it. So, it could be unique slide titles 1, unique slide titles 2, or unique slide titles continued. So there are different ways to make that work. And it can be really helpful when you're just trying to find the right slide. Images are definitely something that we hear a lot of questions about. And you can kind of categorize the image that you're using as one of 3 things. It's most likely going to be either a decorative image, so an image that doesn't add anything to the content. And for that, you can mark it as decorative, so a screen reader will skip it. And we'll show you a little bit more about that. Or it might be a functional image. So that's gonna function as a link or a control a video or audio file. So that should be labeled with alt text that makes clear what the function is. So saying like link to the MIT homepage or play video. Or it might be an informational image. So it adds something to the content. It's being included for a specific reason. And that should be described succinctly in the alt text. And that can be difficult to do and take some practice. But the auto-generated alt text that comes up in some programs like PowerPoint does not work well. It's never going to accurately capture the image with the necessary context of like why you included this, why is it important? And it also doesn't often do a great job of capturing the image in general. So to get a little more specific with the alt text, just to kind of quickly go over how, there's a couple different ways to get to doing the alt text, but if you have an image and you right click it, usually you'll see this menu and you can find edit alt text. And then you'll get a box that will look something like this image I've included here, where we have the header alt text and the question, how would you describe this object and its context to someone who is blind? So that context is still really key. And they're recommending 1 to 2 sentences in length. And down below, it's really light here, but you can see there's a box for mark as decorative as well. So for those images that you're just including because it's pretty or something, you can mark that as decorative. So when we're writing the alt text, you really want to consider the purpose of the image. Why was it included? And what are the intended takeaways? And I'm going to let Catherine tell you a little bit about using graphs and tables and how that fits into all of this.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole session on graphs and tables and how to describe those with alt text because they can be challenging. A lot of times with a graph, you're trying to show some data in a particular way. And I think Jen has mentioned before, it's nice to present information in multiple ways because we find that many people get the information, they get what you're trying to say if you present it in different ways. So the graph is helpful. It's also helpful to describe what the graph is showing. And maybe if it's a simple graph, you could do that in the alt text where you say, you know, this is a graph showing increasing housing costs in the Boston area over, you know, from 1990 to 2020. And it's also helpful to include the source data, the data that's based on in a table, because then someone could look at the actual data and see what's actually happening. So sometimes you can put a graph and a table side by side, or maybe on different slides. And in the alt text, you could describe what's happening, or maybe in the text of your slide, you describe what's happening. But it's great to give people multiple ways to get that information that you're trying to show graphically or visually. So I hope that's helpful.
Great. Yeah, and one thing to think about when we talk about what's the purpose is, you know, it is hard to write alt text. And it's particularly really hard to write alt text for content that somebody else has created. So some of you I know might end up being put in that role. I've been put in that role, and it's really tricky because you generally wind up needing to go back to the person who created it and ask some clarifying questions about why was this included? What are those key takeaways? So if possible, it's always best to have that creator adding in the alt text themselves. And again, we're just going to hate on that auto-generated alt text one more time. And then transitions and fades. So that's like when you're moving from one slide to another, and sometimes it has like a funny effect for anyone who's unfamiliar with those terms for it. So we recommend that you keep it simple if you decide to use them, and that the presenter is going to have control over the timing. It's not an automated timing. So sometimes when you set those up, it'll say like fade either on click, so that's the presenter choosing the timing, or after 5 seconds or something, and that typically does not work out so well. And automated captioning and recording. So captions or transcripts should be provided for any embedded audio or video. And we know that PowerPoint and Google Slides can both generate some auto captions while you present, but they won't save the auto captions. So there's, it just appears and then it disappears. There's no way to save those at this time. But I'm sure we've probably talked all of your ears off about your different captioning options over the last 6 months or so. But if anybody needs to be pointed in the direction for some captioning vendors, we're definitely happy to help with that. And then there's also an embedded accessibility checker within PowerPoint, within Google Slides. So we can try that out. So I'm gonna just change how I'm sharing my screen so that you guys can follow along with this new view. So I'm going into tools and check accessibility. And as we can see, there's a couple things that we can fix. So we're gonna look a little more closely into this missing alternative text. Except it's freezing on us. But typically what that will do is when you select it, it'll direct you to where that problem is. And I know that on this slide, I left one for us so that we can look at it. So I'm going to edit the alt text for this one. And for this one, so I have my slide title, questions, and then I included an image of a blackboard with a question mark drawn in chalk. And I really included this just to have something on the slide because it's just a prompt for questions. So I'm going to mark this as decorative. So we can see this alt text box popped up, and there's this option to click mark as decorative. And now the alt text box says content marked as decorative will not expose a description to screen readers. So I'm not writing anything in that alt text box. I'm just marking this one as decorative. And then I think the other one that I left to do, is this image of an alt text box that I included. So for this one, I'm just going to write alt text box prompt in PowerPoint. So the other thing that came up when we checked our accessibility was a couple of things that say check reading order. So that's asking me to do a manual check of some things because oftentimes when you do these automatic accessibility checkers, there are some things that they'll catch that only a human can take to the next level. So they'll ask you, check this part manually. So what we would do is we would ideally be working with a screen reader and testing that part out for ourselves. And I'm gonna go back into this pretty mode for more questions, general questions from this last bit or from anywhere throughout.
Jen, Chris had put a couple questions in a little while back. The first is, should we label the image, decorative, etc., as part of the alt text? Chris, I think Jen might have covered that in that last segment. If we have not answered that question, definitely let us know, but there is a checkbox that you can hit. And then Chris's second question, in my slides, I often use the text boxes to indicate the source of an image, quotation, etc. Sounds like that doesn't work with a screen reader.
I see, because they're adding that additional text box. So with that, it just adds that element of like, will the screen reader read this in the right order? So you may want to check that manually by listening through.
Is there a way, a more automated way to check for reading order other than actually having somebody run a screen reader? Like, for example, can you save the slide deck as a text file and you could see the reading order that way?
There's a way in there where you can, it'll show you the order in which it will read, but yeah, the selection pane. I find listening through to give me a little more peace of mind.
Okay.
That might just be a personal preference. And then Rich, do you have any other thoughts on using the text boxes to indicate the source of an image or quote?
I mean, like you said, it just has to be in the right reading order, has to be correct so that when you read it with a screen reader, you know what object they're talking about.
Okay.
So that, so that's one reason to use the alt text for that is that, you know, it's directly associated with the object you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as the text that you write in a text box appears, you know, near what you're talking about or in the right order, so you know, so when you're reading with a screen reader, it actually makes sense in context. Then that's all you care about, really.
Thanks. And I think we have a request to look at the selection pane. So back to that general accessibility checker, I got those warnings to check reading order. So I'm going to look at the slide that asked me to, and I'm going to go to, and the accessibility checker walks you through this, which is great. So it says steps to fix and walks me through it. So I'm going arrange, and I'm going to look at the order of the objects. So it's telling me that like my bottom layer is that title, color, contrast, and it's going to go to that text. Then there's the logo, and then the image from the voter website. So maybe I moved those images around after adding them, and it's kind of catching that of like, well, you added it in this order, but it's not in what the expected order of left to right. So that's an interesting catch on the program's part. Does that kind of clear that up? Any other questions?
Jen, we have a question from Lindsay. I imagine PDFs is a separate conversation / training. Yes.
Exactly, yeah. But laying the groundwork in PowerPoint or whatever your source document is going to be puts you in a much better position. So we do recommend doing most of this kind of work in your source document, such as PowerPoint, if you were going to turn this into a PDF. So you'd still have to do some extra steps, but making it as accessible as you can in the original document goes a long way. All right. If there's no other questions, I'm just going to quickly share some resources. So just to highlight some things that we like to refer to. So there's this organization called WebAIM. They have a lot of great stuff, including a page about PowerPoint accessibility. It has a lot of good tips. One of the tips there is this accessible PowerPoint template sampler that they pointed us in the direction of. And another organization I refer to for some of my tips and content is the AIM Center. So there's WebAIM, AIM, and then the AIM Center, AEM. That one's accessible educational materials. And then just also that color contrast analyzer that Catherine demoed for us.
And Jen, it looks like Mary Ziegler also shared a link for accessible templates in Office.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. Great. And then if you want to get in touch with us, you can always reach us at accessibility@mit.edu. So that will go to our team. And our site is studentlife.mit.edu/DAS.
Jen, can you do one more question?
Of course.
So Roshni says, I can't remember if you covered it already, but what about animations? Are any animations better or worse for accessibility? I often use them to guide the presentation more intentionally to avoid wall of text slides.
Oh, great question. What kind of animations? Like, we're talking about GIFs or talking about kind of the transitions within the slides? Appear and disappear. Yeah, the transitions within slides. I think the guidance on that is just try and kind of keep it simple. Just make sure that it's not going to be too jarring for anybody, or that it's not making it harder to see or read the content or understand the content. Sometimes it could mean that one component is moving away before somebody has a chance to capture all of it. So those are just kind of the things to keep in mind. Yeah, Catherine, anything else you can think of there?
Yeah, I think keeping it simple, making sure that things aren't moving on their own, that maybe they're not moving too quickly, they're not flashing. If it's just a simple slide transition, that's fine. But you know, things that move and flash and could be confusing, I think can be really jarring.
Oh, line by line text shows up on a single slide. Yeah. I think as long as you're being purposeful about how you're using it, I would say line by line text showing up as you're presenting more information, but the maybe prior lines fade. That one might be hard for students who maybe need a little extra time of taking notes, or well, not necessarily students, but whoever you're presenting to needs a little extra time taking in that information. So I would say yes to having them show up, but maybe avoid having them leave after.
Okay, I think those are all the questions we have. We did want to announce that our next office hours will be November 18th at 10 o'clock, and we'll be doing demonstrations of assistive technology. So we'll send out an invite and registration link for that in all the typical channels. So we're hoping to see you all then and hope this has been helpful. Please let us know if you have questions. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.